Dr. Craig Swenson is a national leader in higher education. He joined Ashford University in 2016 as the President and Chief Executive Officer. Prior to that, he served as the interim president at our sister institution, now folded into Ashford University, the University of the Rockies. Prior to that, he served as the Chancellor of the Argosy System, the Chief Academic Officer at Education Management Corporation, as well as academic leadership roles at Western Governors and the University of Phoenix. Dr. Swenson pursued his academic profession and passion after a successful career in marketing and communications executive. Dr. Swenson has his PhD in education with an emphasis in adult and organizational learning from Walden University. His master's degree is in organizational communication from BYU, and his bachelor's degree, interestingly enough, is in journalism and mass communication from the University of Utah. So with that, I will hand the podium over and the mic to Dr. Craig Swenson.
I have the most wonderful executive team, and they are never afraid to tell me, like my wife Nanette is not afraid to tell me, that I talk too much. Since the day I learned that our university was going to take a different path and become a private, self-governed, not-for-profit or nonprofit university, I'm sure you can guess that I've spent more than a few hours thinking about what that means. Today I thought I'd tell you what I've been thinking, and in doing so I realize what a risk I'm taking. Depending on your definition of thinking, you may dispute that what I'm sharing qualifies, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Normally I would approach a keynote out in front, and they always curse me because I move too much to the right and left and get out of camera. So I'm not going to do that today. Because of the subject, I decided to approach this more as if I had written a think piece and something that I might submit for publication or read at a conference. So what are the appropriate thoughts for someone like me to be thinking at a time like this? I could wax poetic. Two roads diverged into a wood, and I chose the one less traveled. I actually like the words of another great poet even better. In this case, it was Yogi Berra who said simply, "When you come to a fork in the road, take it." And I think we should. And so here we find ourselves at the proverbial fork in the road. The problem, of course, it isn't a two-pronged fork, just going off and veering off in directions. It's quite like the graphic trees that paleontologists or paleoanthropologists create, showing the evolution of our species out of the larger primate and then hominid populations. Those trees and are characterizing our eventual separation from our earliest ancestors. These trees are interesting and always fun to look at because they highlight the mutations and permutations. They show branches leading off, some that represent leaps forward, other that result in dead ends. There were an infinite number of possibilities created by the confluence of random genetic mutation and unpredictable geographical and climatic events that characterized an external environment in eternal and continuous flux. I can imagine a Neanderthal tribal shaman trying to explain why the sapiens who had moved in over the ridge were gaining the upper hand in the competition for food. After much study, I have discovered that they have bigger frontal lobes. Who knew? So we're at a strange place like that because we're in the middle of this, and being in the middle of it, you usually can't see where it's going. You can't. And I wish I could look around corners, but I can't. And so I think we're in one of those positions where it's a little scary, but that's what makes it fun. Our organization's evolution is obviously occurring over ridiculously shorter span of time than our ancestors. But even then, if we multiply the number of decisions we need to make by the options for each and the potential combinations of all those decisions and options, there are more than enough possible outcomes to keep our brains spinning. When I frame the question of our future in this context, it's not hard to feel like the keynote speaker in a Gary Larson cartoon. It's a dinosaur standing behind the podium of an international scientific convention of dinosaurs. I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like this: ladies and gentlemen, the situation is pretty bleak. A huge asteroid is hurtling toward the Earth. It's up to us to save it. And we have brains the size of walnuts. So what do we do? There are a couple of possible responses when faced with a situation like this. And I will tell you that we are not alone in feeling this way. Except for the elite institutions across the country, most every university president is having thoughts that keep him or her awake at night about how to keep their institution sustainable. And ours is a particularly unique challenge because we have to reinvent the place. So what's the antidote? There are a couple possible responses. We can panic and think this is the end of the line. We're not going to make it. Give up. It's happening across the country in institutions. That's a very human response to our current social and political climate, too. I mean, we see it all around us. Yuval Noah Harari speaks of the folly of this very human response when he writes, "The first step is to tone down the prophets of doom and switch from panic mode to bewilderment. Panic is a form of hubris. It comes from the smug feeling that one knows exactly where things are headed, down. Bewilderment is more humble and therefore more clear-sighted. Do you feel," Harari asked, "like running down the street crying the apocalypse is upon us? Try telling yourself, no, it's not that. The truth is, I just don't understand what's happening, what's going on in the world." I like that. Standing at the fork of this road with all the possibilities open to us, I'm not panicked. I'm bewildered. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't understand everything that's going on, but I'm dead set about finding out what it is and figuring out what to do about it. My own subjective way of beginning to approach these things is just to ask questions. In fact, I've been asking myself 3 or 4 kinds of questions. Some of them are big questions, existential-sized questions, questions that make you ask the reason why. Why are we doing this? Why do we exist? Why should we continue to exist? After all, if we're going to do something, we ought to figure out why we're doing it. In this case, as we separate from our parent organization, has our why changed? Maybe, I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking. And if it has changed, how? Others are medium-sized questions. Questions that ask what, as in, once you figured out why you're doing it, what do you do next? What do you do about the why? The third are operational questions. They are how, where, and when kinds of questions. How will we do what we've decided to do? When and where will we do these things? And the final question involves whether, what, how, or when, and where we do those things circle back to the why. Whether we've succeeded in fulfilling our why. With that introduction, I'm going to tell you that I've been asking myself some questions. Not some questions, a lot of questions. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share some of them with you because I want to, and I have the microphone, and you don't, and I can. And I'm going to focus, and this will not be a surprise to some, because of where we are in this process, I'm going to focus on the big existential kinds of questions. The questions, higher order questions of why and what. That's because if we're going to take the right fork in the road, we need to answer those first. We need to know our why. I think it was Simon Sinek who says, go back to why. But before I do, I'll be honest and say I have far more questions right now than I have answers. We live at a very challenging time in the world's history. Technology, demographics, and economics have collided like three tectonic plates when the continents began to form from Pangaea, the supercontinent that preceded them. These forces have similarly altered our landscape, the forces that we're under, in ways that would make it unrecognizable to dinosaurs like me. And they continue to disrupt and transform almost every aspect of our lives to both good and ill effect. Just as it would be impossible to have stopped tectonic shift. I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Stop tectonic shift." I thought it was funny. It's also foolhardy to think that the breakneck speed at which our current phase of societal evolution would somehow protect major institutions like ours, colleges and universities, from the forces of change. Though we want to believe that they won't, and so sometimes it's too late. These major societal institutions are the systems and structures through which we govern ourselves. We grow, create, and deliver the goods and services that feed and sustain the people of the world. We build the civic and religious temples that give meaning to our lives. Our colleges and universities are among those basic institutions. The larger institutional family of which we are a part unlocks, understands, uses, and shares the secrets of the natural world. Colleges and universities foster creation of the highest expressions of human imagination. We train those who lead society's other institutions. We ask the uncomfortable questions the new knowledge we are creating raises for us, and we're subject to the forces we helped unleash and that are turning the world upside down. There's long been a general consensus about the raison d'etre of what has come to be known as higher education. This shared understanding emerged prior to the founding of the University of Bologna in 1088, which is the longest continuously operating university in the world. In the 19th century, Cardinal John Henry Newman wrote a book called The Idea of a University. And that idea still exists, and it continues to evolve, but it now is evolving even more rapidly because we cannot not consider that idea if we hope to survive. So finally, I'm going to ask some questions. Just what does it mean to be a university in a time like this? Are the basic purposes of universities different than what they used to be? If so, how and why? If not, how do we maintain any equilibrium and create sustainable environments? What do advances in artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and the cognitive science portend for the future of those of us committed to serving our society and the world? In that regard, what kind of world are we preparing our students for? Have the ways we serve society changed? Is there still a place for the tradition of liberal education? Do workforce development and economic necessity trump the traditional purposes of a university education? Are workplace competencies the skills needed to perform specific jobs, or are they the larger skills that prepare able people to adapt to the changes they face each day? because the narrow jobs we prepare people for will not be around 5 years from now. How do we educate for specific jobs? Is a university the place for that? How do we educate for creation of larger skills and competencies? Does a focused professional curriculum teach those best? Or is a liberal education the best seedbed for that kind of learning? Are these mutually exclusive? What credentials will be most important in the future? Will the degree continue to be the most legitimate coin of the realm? Or will there be others, badges and competencies and certificates that take their place? Or will it be a combination? What does it mean to be an exclusively online institution? What responsibilities does that impose on us? How does it make us different in basic ways? What does it mean to be a teaching institution in times like this? Should our focus be primarily on preparing people to succeed in the world or in the workplace? Shouldn't we be focusing on practical skills? But if we prepare them for the world, aren't we preparing them for the workplace? Should our mission as an institution change? If not, okay, if so, if yes, why and how? How should we organize ourselves best to pursue that mission? What is the best business model going forward? Because our business model is going to change somewhat for us to be and remain sustainable. What strategies will be most important for us to pursue of all the strategies we could choose? How should we design learning experiences that best enable students to become competent, learn and become competent? How do we use technology to create those environments? And when does technology work against us? Who should teach and how should they teach? And why? We have so many questions to ask and so many questions to answer as we reimagine Ashford University for the future. Of course, many of the questions I posed have no right or wrong answers. As with so many things, the truth is somewhere betwixt and between. Now, that's where data science comes in. That's what some folks want to say, and it's true. Data science is important. But for all the talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, at least for the present, it's not only science, but of the artful application of human beings that will tell the tale. I've been reading 2 books on artificial intelligence in the world. One whose author I quoted earlier, Yuval Noah Harari, and he's written several books, Sapiens, a couple on Sapiens, but this last one that he's just published is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And it's frightening. It's sort of exciting, but it's also frightening. It could easily be a dystopic future, and we ought to be worried about it, worried enough to do something about it and try while we're in the middle of this onrush to think about things in ways that human beings don't often think about things. We were, in an evolutionary sense, we were built for an environment in which changes were just slow and incremental and somewhat random, and we could adapt. And those who had the adaptations and were able to pass them along survived, and those who didn't. That's where we got those dead ends. We simply as a species are not equipped by nature to make the kinds of decisions and changes that we're having to make, and they're coming at us every day. We're not equipped for it. So we, by some force of will, have to figure out how to organize ourselves. And ironically, artificial intelligence might be one of the best solutions for that. But that's frightening when you think about what artificial intelligence portends. Harari asks for the future of liberal democracy, which is the democracies that most of us hearken to and are comfortable with. We could see life choices almost totally by algorithm, and that's a pretty dark view. We can see, and most of the people who are writing on this subject talk about the threat to the workforce and to what people do for livings and how, and then what do we do? So I'm not trying to scare everybody. I'm just trying to say we are at a crossroads, not only as a university, but as a society and as a civilization. We've got some big things to talk about. I was a little dismissive of machine learning, and I shouldn't be, because we really use it as a tool. We need it. It tells us more about our students. It tells us how best to serve them. But I worry about it from if you step back and think about what that means for society. In his poem, Choruses from the Rock, Eliot wrote, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" And I would add, where is the humanity we may lose in data? So we have to be on guard, and that is one of the purposes of a university. But being on guard and being able to tell that requires far more than just developing narrow job skills. We need to help people develop the kinds of skills that will help them work with others to adapt to the environment. That's not the way many of us think, and it's not the way politically that many of our political leaders think. It's all about the economy, it's all about the workforce, and we are an institution that exists, a teaching institution that exists to serve the workforce development needs of our society and of our students. But many of you know Pat Ogden. Pat and I worked together for years and years closely, and we used to look at each other when certain decisions would be made, and one of us would say, well, after all, we are a university. And we can't ever forget, we are a university, and it's very important for us to always keep that in mind, because that imposes on us a requirement, and we will need to be true to that going forward. But I don't think that being true to that will prevent us from being successful. To the contrary, I think it will enable us to be successful. So I'm going to venture just a couple of thoughts about the way forward. We need to avoid false dichotomies, like the battle often fought with traditionalists who decry the increasing vocationalism of universities. And those whose focus is purely on practical education are mistaken if they think that higher education is not about teaching theory. It is about theory. All a theory is a way to organize and explain what happens in our world and to make predictions from it. Kurt Lewin said there's nothing quite so practical as a good theory. And as we design education for our students, it is their ability to understand the nature of a discipline and how the theories fit together and to explain the world, and then how to apply them in specific situations. There is a book by John Gaddis that I have read a couple of times recently called On Grand Strategy. And he talks about Isaiah Berlin's philosopher from England earlier in the middle of the 20th century, who talked about there being two kinds of leaders: hedgehogs that can see only one thing, and foxes that can see the relationships between things. And we need to develop foxes, people who see the larger relationships. Now, I will tell you that I happen to think that in terms of preparing people for the workforce, there are some very basic things, and prepare them for work and for life. There are some very basic things that we have to do. They need to be able to think about when you face a situation. We face all kinds of daunting challenges right now. If you don't understand the basics of science and of how our world works, how will you ever be able to, with an informed voice, speak about what's happening to our climate? We live in a state where we're seeing mega fires on this scale that have never existed before. How are we going to figure that out? We have politicians who want to give simple answers. One quote I'll repeat in a few minutes: H.L. Mencken said, "For every complex question, there's a simple answer, and it's wrong." Understanding how we build political organizations requires an understanding of the power of how society organizes itself, and how power structures work, and how strong leaders emerge, and and the basis of human nature. Why do we act the way we do? So we need to understand psychology. We need to understand sociology. We need to understand history so that we can see the patterns. And we take all of those things and we start to meld them. I would, as a CEO, much rather have somebody who has that kind of orientation work for me. And not just as a university president. I would like to have somebody in any organization who does that, because they're going to be able to solve problems and analyze and communicate. A university education, by definition, is a liberal education, but it ought to have a practical purpose. And so how do we design that going forward? In a book I'm reading right now, it's called "What Do You Think, Mr. Ramirez?" And I would, those of you who like reading about the history of higher education would like it. It's based on the story that this author tells of a man he met who was an immigrant from Mexico or Central America, and who came to the United States and somehow got directed into a community college classroom, and was sitting in this classroom, didn't speak English very well. It happened to be a class in which the professor was discussing Shakespeare. And they were reading, and of course this student, Mr. Ramirez, was in all likelihood lost. And the professor came to him and stood in front of him and saw, in the way that those of us who teach ought to be seeing, saw this glimmer. So he said, "So what do you think, Mr. Ramirez?" And Mr. Ramirez later recounted this to the author. He said, "I didn't know what I thought, but that challenge made me think." And he became a professor of classical literature. And who would have thunk it? He says, Harpham writes, "One challenging aspect of our complex and dynamic language is that words sometimes lose their original meanings and take on multiple meanings. At other times, a word is smart and in vogue for a time until we tire of it. We simply wear it out. This is the fate of some perfectly good descriptive terms." And I put in parentheses paradigm. When I was in my doctoral program, paradigm was the big word. And the turning point, Fritjof Capra, and the structure of scientific revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. That paradigm was the big word, and then it was out of favor before too long. Walker Percy, the Southern author and semanticist, said we just wear words out until they become trite and meaningless. And he says that's what poets are for, is to wrench the meaning back into words. Often a word can remain in common use, but be understood quite differently in ways that create confusion and discord. Liberal is such a word. We can be liberal in praise or in how much we salt our food. We may be a political liberal, a term that can either be used as a pejorative label or a self-description of its distinction or praise. When we apply the word liberal to education, however, its meaning is quite different. And that's one thing that I would like us to help people understand, because we have lots of people who cast the term liberal education who don't understand that it means something quite different than being a political liberal. It's quite misunderstood, misinterpreted, or misappropriated. A liberal education, as most scholars view it, does not pertain to one's political views. Although naive or ignorant politicians sometimes appear to make judgments about the value of college education based on the belief that liberal refers to one's political orientation. In fact, most of the greatest conservative political thinkers and leaders, as well as our politically liberal thinkers and politicians, were liberally educated. Our founding fathers were liberally educated. Over the last 2 years, I've probably listened on Audible on my drives and then read, when I wasn't listening, the biographies of 10 or 12 of our greatest leaders. And these were people, by and large, who were liberally educated, either autodidacts like Lincoln, who were self-educated, or John Adams, who, even though he attended, went far beyond in his erudition. We need to reinvent liberal education as a part of workforce development, in my opinion. The other night, preparing for this talk, I remembered this. Whatever else it is, the purpose of education is learning. Learning happens only when the brain is ready to learn. The brain is ready to learn when it senses a need. Sometimes that need results from a reaction to danger, but sometimes the need comes from the heart. When the need to learn becomes a passion out of curiosity or a drive or an obsession. At times the need comes from within, an inspiration or an epiphany. Other times it's the result of prodding, tweaking, or guiding, the kind of thing that a good teacher naturally does. What do you think, Mr. Ramirez? Perhaps autodidacts like Lincoln didn't need teachers, although Lincoln, without the benefit of many live teachers, turned to those long dead and learned from them. But for me at least, and perhaps for many of us, the prodding, tweaking, and guiding of people who cared about us, either in bunches or saw some potential lurking in us as individuals, was the magic, and is why we're here today. They excite us to learn as we see their own curiosity and passion, or they help us make meaning out of things that before were unknown or confusing. They lead us to the marriage of new knowledge, experience, and meaning. I wanted to say earlier and passed over it, but I'm going to give you a suggestion. We're part of an institution, a higher education institution with a history. We're part of a sector of higher education with a history, a sector that exists as one of our major societal institutions that has its own history. We stand on the shoulders of those who stand on shoulders. And to understand our future, we need to understand our past. in preparing this, I didn't have time to do that. So instead I'm going to ask everybody, raise your hand. Everybody, raise your hand high. Thank you. You just agreed to accept an assignment. Here it is. And I say this because I think this will be useful for us as we start to answer these questions. One of my dearest friends and a former member of Ashford University's board is Richard Katz. Richard served in the University of California system as a leader, and then, in fact, he worked closely with Clark Kerr, who created the notion of the multiversity. He, for 19 years, was a senior fellow at Educause, and just last week received that organization's Lifetime Achievement Award. And I was fortunate to sit next to him at a table at his table in a dinner in his honor. If Richard isn't our best higher education futurist, and I think he is certainly up there, he is on an elite short list. A few years ago, Richard published a video, and you can get it on YouTube. It's EDU at 2025. That's it. Go into YouTube, pull it down. It's quite fun, actually. And I really would like to invite you to look it up on YouTube and watch it. You get a short course in higher education's past and a provocative look around the corner into possible futures, and I think you'll enjoy it. So here we are. What do we do? How do we make sense of this? I'm going to go back to Harari's notion of bewilderment as the best way. I'll bet some of you are as bewildered as I am about the direction we should go as an institution. And I can imagine some who might say, okay, you're in charge, right? Okay, big shot, just what are we supposed to do? And to which I'm responding, hey, I just told you, I don't know. But I plan to spend a lot of time in the next weeks and months and the next couple of years becoming less bewildered, or bewildered at a much more complex level. Since doing that by myself would be pretty lonely, I wanted to suggest that maybe we should be bewildered and befuddled together. Let's try and figure this out. Who knows? It just might be fun. And I think this is such an adventure. And we will never know if we can do it until we give it our best shot. Along the way, we need to avoid two temptations. The first is to make the answer too complex. The philosopher William of Ockham said that the solution to a problem should be the one with the fewest number of assumptions, in essence, the simplest answer. The more assumptions, he reasoned, the greater the likelihood of a mistake. On the other hand, it's easy to succumb to the temptation to make it too simple. H.L. Mencken wrote, as I mentioned earlier, for every complex question, there's a simple answer, and it's wrong. And actually, Occam qualified, it was called Occam's razor, many of you I know are familiar with it, to say that you choose the simplest answer only if it does a better job than the complex answer. Well, we're dealing with a complex question here, and it will require complex thinking and creative thinking, and it will require foxes, not hedgehogs, people who can look across and see the vagaries and see the relationships between things. John Gaddis uses Lincoln as the perfect example of the fox, because he could see where he was going, where he needed to be in terms of slavery and preserving the Union. But he knew that if he plowed straight ahead, as some of those radicals and conservatives wanted him to do, he would get caught in the swamps. So he navigated his way around until he got to his goal. Other leaders are hedgehogs. They have one idea and they go after it unceasingly. And that's a good trait. We should be both. But we have to teach people how to do that. And it's going to be hard. There isn't a simple answer. It's Tom Hanks' character in A League of Their Own that I've quoted before. When Dottie was quitting and she said, "It's hard." And he said, "It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, anybody could do it. Everybody would do it. Hard is what makes it great." So how about it? What do you say? Let's put our heads together and imagine a future, a sustainable future for Ashford University, one that helps us figure out how to mesh a remarkable past with the crazy challenges that are coming at us. So, thank you. Question? If you, yeah, are we done? Time-wise? If I'd be happy to have a discussion with any of you that'd like to comment or disagree, but you disagree at your peril.
I didn't get any sleep at night with all those questions in there.
That's a good question.
Hi, Craig. I'm not going to disagree. I was just thinking as you were talking about how to find the path and see the light and know which way to go when you get to that fork in the road. And I just go, you follow the learner, you follow the learner, you follow the learner. And so I wondered if you might comment on where you see the learners taking us as we look forward.
I mean, that's a terrific question, and that's not an easy one because it's like everything else. I don't necessarily see a great uniform, homogeneous set of learners. I think the learners are as varied as all of us are. I think we have to avoid simple nostrums for answering it. I continue to hear a lot about learning styles. I will tell you that the literature on learning styles is not very promising. Whether it's a map, what is it? Krasivsky said the map isn't the territory. Operationalizing and coming up with operational constructs for what learning styles are and how you predict them is wrong. So we don't want to chase things down the rabbit hole that aren't there. There's just no empirical support for it. The best thing we know about how people learn is that a lot of it, some of it depends on native skills and the ability to think at certain levels. Some of it depends on the external environment and its conduciveness to that. And some of it depends just on the context. And so it's figuring out what is the context that will motivate that student. The direction that we have to go is toward the customization of learning. And ironically, that is going to use basic principles of artificial intelligence properly applied, but only as an excuse, only as a reason or a facilitator for giving the student more time to engage with other students and with a faculty member. If you think about our structure right now, think about how much time our faculty members really get to spend engaging with their students. And yet we know, I could tell you today 3 things that faculty members could do if they had the time and inclination that would improve retention overnight. They would humanize the classroom in ways that make them real human beings who care about those students. They would guide the discussions. Think about our discussion boards. They're sort of, we've built rules into them that they're not discussions. I think about discussions as discussion leadership, the way I would teach in a classroom. And so we're going to do discussion boards, it's somebody who knows how to lead and guide and weave their way through that and do that prodding and goading and tweaking of students to get them excited about it. And the third is feedback. How much original, constructive feedback, both in quality and volume, are we giving to our students? Most of our institutions are structured, and our model is structured to not allow for that. So we have to reinvent our teaching and learning model for our classroom and for our students in ways that will allow those three things to happen. Because I think the key, learning is still primarily a social phenomenon, and that's more difficult in an online environment. Increasingly, our students are going to want connectedness, especially as, when I was in graduate school, we read a book called The Homeless Mind by Peter and Bridget Berger, and it was about the studies that have been done of what happened when people moved in off the farms and went to work in the Ford plants and on the assembly lines, and the dehumanizing aspect of that. When you were on an assembly line and you were just putting a lug nut on a tire, that way you were at that station, or you were putting the windshield on, and the sense of anomie and alienation that people felt. We're living in a time when we're getting that same thing that's happening. Robert Putnam wrote a book a number of years ago called Bowling Alone that talked about the loss of social connections. And as the technology takes us into increasingly parallel virtual worlds, that ought to be frightening to all of us. I don't know if you saw the article in the New York Times last week, but it's about the high-tech CEOs and of the major industry, the major high-tech firms, who won't let their kids have screen time. What do they know that we don't know? I watch my kids, and you talk to them, and I've only been playing for 10 minutes. No, you've been on that an hour and a half. Okay? So how do we reconnect people to people? That to me, to follow the learner means to reconnect them to somebody who cares about them and who they see as real. Long answer, sorry. Anybody else?
Dr. Swenson, we have a comment in the chat.
Okay.
How can we further optimize our digital content to allow students to use their phones and iPad-type devices more effectively, specifically talking about the importance of this for our deployed military students?
Well, it's a great question. Steve Wainwright and I have been talking a lot about about how we create content differently than we've created up until now. One way is by not thinking of a course as an outline and content. Here's the structure and here's the book. Increasingly, the distinction between the course and the content will disappear. And students will be immersed automatically into the learning. And we think that open educational resources are going to be an important way to do that, as long as you can curate them appropriately. It's courseware. It's not a course and a book. It's all integrated. My perception is that if we do continue with a 5-week format, each week there's a foundational set of foundational principles or content that a student needs to demonstrate mastery of. Now, that's the basis of competency-based education. A person who already has that competence should simply be able to show it. But if they don't have it, you have to give them a good way to learn, and adaptive learning is one of those ways that does that. So if somebody knows it and they can come in and go through an exercise quickly, no need to read that, then they have the foundational knowledge that they need to apply in that week's assignment, which I hope won't be just a simple paper. And over 5 weeks of having, think about what we set our students up to do. And this is not just us. This is virtually everyone in higher education. The students either, we assign a book for the course, and the students either buy the book or they don't, generally speaking. If they do buy it, they may buy an old edition that's not up to date. But that usually doesn't matter because in many cases the instructor doesn't require it or test on whether or not they got the concepts. And the students have learned to game in many cases, so they can complete those assignments without having read the foundational content and demonstrated that they know it, which means that there's a deficiency there. There's got to be a learning chunked out that allows us to then apply it, and chunked and apply and chunked and apply. And if we can do that and we do it right, we also rid ourselves of the challenge that we have because of the way our courses and programs are structured. The thing that in our model that doesn't work well is small classes, because it's not created for that. And so we put onesies and twosies and threesies in a structure that is not meant to be learned that way. We have to have a course or a learning design that can be used for an individual with some mentorship, for a small group with some mentorship, or for a larger cohort with mentorship, and the same competencies that come out irrespective of that. You keep hearing about competency-based education, and I'll have people say, are we going to do competency-based? Well, I hope we're already doing it. When you all created the MSIDT, we did a competency-based version, and it was very different than what most competency-based folks are doing. It was very project-based, but I remember saying, we're not going to be allowed to do the self-paced. I think there's a real misnomer in higher education that somehow competency-based correlates 100% with pace. It has nothing to do with pace. It has to do with competence. You can do competency-based in a self-paced environment, and you can do competency-based in a traditional environment. Right now, we can't do it in a self-paced environment because of the regulations, but soon we'll be able to do that. And will we be prepared for that? So in everything we do, it's how do we help the student develop competence? How do we design learning for that? So I think I've taken my hour. One more.
We've got one more. Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you, Dr. Swenson, for the talk and for the questions. Just as educators, I think that we look at different sides of the elephant, and we're all coming at it with our own expertise. And I'm wondering if you would talk to how you see the faculty engaging in this model of, because we keep talking about follow the learner, but we also have practitioners that are our faculty. And how does our model deal with that? And do you see that changing with how the faculty engage with the students? Because we do a lot of training where we bring faculty in and we help them use technology. We're using Civitas right now, which is an excellent tool to show us what's going on in the classroom, and it helps give a better connection between faculty and the students. Can you just talk about where you see faculty in that?
Well, first, I hope before we have a faculty member teach a course that they have the necessary academic preparation, that they understand the basic, the discipline at a level at which they are capable of teaching it. irrespective of whether they're a full-time professor or PhD, as opposed to having spent more time in practice. Having said that, you know, some of the data we look at say that our adjunct faculty members are often more successful than our full-time faculty members at teaching, because they do focus. The content is arranged so that if they're having the students engage with the content, then they can help the students engage with the application. But we have to think about that and how we bring those together. I think that our faculty members are quite phenomenal, and most of them are doing this because they want to make a difference. And so if we together develop some models that they feel good about and that they think are in the best interest of their students, we won't have any problem. If we come up with things that are way too complex, and I do have this concern about the use of technology, because technology is a tool, it's not a toy. And there are times when we go after bright, shiny objects because this is so cool. We could design, and we've talked about this before, we could design the actual, absolute, perfect learning experience for students, and they wouldn't do it. Our students have their own rhythm and their own process. So I could, as an educator, as a theoretician, I could create this perfect thing, but if we can't get the students to do it, then it doesn't matter, it's not going to work. So we've got to be testing and trying all kinds of things along the way and see what works, and then synthesize those things that work into a whole. And that's not something that we're going to do overnight, but we need to do it quickly. We don't have a lot of time. So I hope that helped. Thank you. Thank you all. It's been fun.